Our next City Club report is on Measure 92, GMO Labeling. Ilana Pertle-Genny, Chair of the Committee, will present the report and move for adoption of the report's recommendation. The meeting will then be open for debate and vote by City Club members. Now I turn the podium over to Ilana.
Thank you, Karen, and I want to start by just thanking my committee members, many of whom are here today and who put a lot of time during a very short window into this report. I'd also like to thank City Club for taking on the topic, which the whole committee really believes is very important, and for everyone who is here today and who is participating online for caring enough about this process to put your time into reading the report and paying attention to all of the recommendations that these committees have made. You know, our committee had 7 members, plus a writer, an advisor, my vice chair, and myself. And on the first day, I think, when we went around the room, about half of the people in the room had no opinion. A few were very torn about this topic, and there were a couple of people who were leaning one way or another, but open to what we would hear. And at some point during the process, everybody's opinions evolved. Many people's opinions moved more than once. And over the course of 10 plus possibly interviews, countless articles, and a whole lot of time spent thinking about this topic, a few facts became very central to the committee's thinking. The first of those is that the process of genetic engineering, and I'll use genetic engineering, which is the scientific term for what the ballot measure refers to as GMO labeling, is not inherently good or bad. It is a process by which we change our food to receive the results that farmers are looking for. There are many processes that do that. The second fact that became very clear is that there are some people with real concerns about genetic engineering. There are Oregonians who are concerned that the process has sped up the development of resistances to both pesticides and insecticides that we see in plants and animals where crops are grown. That's a process that happens naturally. Eventually plants develop a resistance to pesticides, or animals do, and to insecticides for plants, and we have to develop newer, stronger ones, but that genetic engineering has sped up that process. There are concerns that there are people who have allergies to some of the things that are put in our food through genetic engineering. When we put insecticides that people are allergic to in our food instead of on it, it is there when you eat that food. And if you have an allergy to it, and that food is not labeled so you have no way of knowing it's in there, you have a reaction. There are people who have concerns about corporations making huge profits by essentially selling everything needed to grow their seeds, the seeds themselves that are genetically engineered, the pesticides that they are genetically engineered to resist, the materials to figure out exactly how much pesticide and water and everything else those seeds need, and that an entire market is being developed around these seeds that are making some people a lot of money and making it a lot harder for some farmers to afford those products. It also became clear to us, though, that there are some concerns which may not be as founded. So far, and I say so far because we don't know what's coming next in genetic engineering, there are not health risks from the process of genetically engineering itself. There is scientific consensus around that from everything that we saw. It became clear to the committee that we don't know what's coming next. As I mentioned, genetic engineering is a process. So far, most of what we see in genetic engineering is the use of insecticides within our food, the resistance to pesticides. We've seen the insertion of some vitamins, although those crops haven't been grown en masse the way we've seen the other ones grown. And we don't know what the next phase of genetically engineered food will look like. And it also became clear to the committee that there is not a lot of information available about the genetically engineered foods that are on the market or that could be coming. Most of the research that's been done has been done by the companies that genetically engineer the food. Those companies tell us to trust them. The data that is available is made available when they allow scientists access to their products. And there is not a lot of either publicly funded or otherwise neutral information available. and that's of concern to the members of our committee. So what do we do with all of those facts, with all of that information? Well, if there are real concerns, this is something we need to address. And one of the things that the opponents said is that there were not real concerns, that the main concern was health, and that that's not a concern, so we should just say no, that it's unnecessary. But the committee believes there are real concerns, so we can't start there. What the committee did instead is said there are real concerns about genetic engineering, and there are some red flags that were raised by those opposed to this measure. So let's look at those red flags and decide if they are important enough to outweigh the concerns of Oregonians who would like to see their food labeled as to whether or not it is genetically engineered. Those concerns included increased cost of food, inefficiencies in the food delivery system, which could lead to increased costs but also had their own complications, a stigma that could become attached to this food, and, as I mentioned, the fact that they believe that labeling is unnecessary. So let's start with that unnecessary labeling. We don't believe it's unnecessary as a committee. We also believe that, as you may hear from some opponents of this report and of the measure, that we shouldn't label because they believe it's unnecessary. You know, the committee found that there are lots of things that are labeled. We see on Coke cans labels for the redemption values in many different states. That's something that was started in Oregon. We see on products the labeling of country of origin. There are many labels we see that may not be necessary for health reasons. The stigma, the main thing you'll hear, and I see a 15-second sign, is that that stigma is proven because there are not genetically engineered foods sold elsewhere. In those countries that opponents might mention, the labeling requirements were put into place before genetically engineered foods were on the market. We do not have a comparable market to look at to Oregon and to the United States. We don't believe that that stigma will necessarily occur. We cannot know if it'll occur. And frankly, the burden is on those companies who genetically engineer seeds and foods to prove that there's no reason for a stigma to develop. That's in their hands, and they can prevent that stigma from developing. And third, cost, I will mention briefly, and you can read more in the report, that we looked at the potential effect of raising the cost of food. Studies show dramatically different cost increases. There is no proof that they will be as high as some studies suggest. And we heard from food access advocates that a small increase in price is worth the dignity that it provides consumers to have a choice in food. The committee made the decision that because we couldn't prove there would be a high increase, we should assume there would be a small increase and therefore label food. I apologize. I ran out of time, so I didn't say it. Therefore, I move that City Club adopt the committee recommendation and support a yes vote to label genetically engineered food.
The microphone to my right is labeled yes for those who favor the ballot measure on GMO labeling, and the one to my left is labeled no for those who oppose it. Will the following members please line up behind the yes microphone? Paul Brown, Andrea Meyer, Christine Farrington, Apurva Pawashi, and Matthew Shabold. Will the following members please line up behind the no microphone? Pat McCormick and Leanne Hoagie. We have tossed a coin, and we will first recognize a member opposing the ballot measure. Pat?
Members, I'm Pat McCormick, a member of the City Club, up again. Fundamental to the case for labeling is that consumers deserve accurate and reliable information about the food that they eat and the products that they buy. The study committee failed to note that the Measure 92 is so poorly written that consumers won't know anything specific about what's in their food. The language of Measure 92 makes that clear. It says, "This law shall not be construed to require either the listing or identification of any ingredient or ingredients that were genetically engineered." In other words, the label gives a warning, but it doesn't give consumers a reason why. Consumers who are concerned about eating anything that's been produced through genetic engineering already have federal labeling standards that help them select the foods that they prefer organic and non-GMO labeling foods in stores today. More than 10,000 items that meet those criteria are already on sale. Measure 92 adds no reliable or actionable kind of information for consumers to use, except for the warning that it gives that it should be avoided. And they already have a better system for that. I recommend a no vote on the report and on Measure 92.
Hello, my name is Paul Brown, and I was on the committee that did the research. I read well over 1,000 pages of material. One of the things that we definitely heard repeatedly was that there are existing methods in place that would document this. Fact of the case is that organic, which is a recognized federal standard, does actually say that you cannot have genetic engineered products or ingredients in your product in order to be labeled organic. However, the problem is that organic foods are quite a bit more costly than non-organic foods, and there is no standard for GE or GMO labeling. All of the GE GMO labeling is voluntary, and therefore a consumer that's going into a store and wants to know if the food they're picking up has been genetically engineered does not have access to that information if they do not have the money to pay for organic. So one of the main things that we're concerned about is the right to know and the right for people to get to choose what food they're having. And having a mandatory labeling for GE would allow people to have more choices than strictly going with organic, which tends to be quite a bit more expensive.
Hello, my name's Leanne Hoagie. I'm a City Club member, and I've served on two different study committees in the past. And so therefore, I want to thank this group and all the other groups that have put so much time and energy into these reports, because it does take a lot of time and energy. But before I had the time to serve on City Club study committees, I worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, working on international agricultural issues, especially food availability and food security issues in South Asia, India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, and in Latin America. And I watched the emergence of this technology, genetic engineering, very skeptically in the mid-90s. It's like, yeah, they're promising all these great things, but it's a hoax. It's the corporate folks trying to make money. Over the past 2 decades, increasingly and consistently, the scientific studies have come out showing that the foods are safe, people use less pesticides, it's not harming the environment more than any other kind of agriculture. My concern about this report is that it's focused on concerns. It's not focused on the science. And the lack of really good scientific reports trouble me. And people like American Medical Association, National Academy of Sciences, Health Canada, European Commission, a bunch of organizations say this food is not significantly different from other foods, and there's no need to label it for nutrition or safety needs. Vote no, please.
Good evening. Andrea Meyer, City Club member and Vice Chair of the committee. Briefly, I wanted to make a few points, and I wanted to pardon? You can't hear me, Sam? You want me closer and louder? I want to reiterate the thoughtful nature of this committee and the approach we took in really listening to all the information, and my colleagues will speak to more detail. I wanted to make a comment about the economic issue, as there will be arguments by the opponents to this measure of the cost. And I thought it was very informative that we can really only be assured that we have access to GE-free products if we buy organic. But not all of us have access or can afford organic. And what I found very meaningful was the testimony of the public policy manager for Partners for Hunger-Free Oregon, when she said, when we asked her why low-income advocates haven't opposed similar measures, she said, there is dignity in choice. I wanted to comment briefly on Mr. McCormick's that we're putting a warning label on these things. That's not accurate. There's no warning, it's information. And so I wanted folks to be clear about that as well. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Christine Farrington. I'm a member of the committee. I was one of the 2 writers, and boy, we did a lot of writing because this was a very lively issue. As former chair of the Conservation Committee of the Portland Garden Club, I urge you to support this City Club support of the measure. I didn't come prepared to speak, and when I signed up, I thought I was voting. So I don't have a prepared speech, but I would say that I think something I haven't heard about is that having these products labeled will help researchers track unintended effects. And although there have been no scientific studies that prove ill health to humans in 20, 25 years, that's not a really long time in human history and in the history of genetically modified crops and the effect that it could have on people and our children and our grandchildren. So I hope you'll keep that in mind and you'll support the City Club position.
Hi, my name is Apurva, and I was also on the City Club Research Committee that wrote the report. I want to reiterate what my committee chair and my fellow committee members have said before me. We had a very great and very thoughtful committee, and we were divided up until the very end. And I just want to say that I am one of those who was very much on the fence about our position up until, I would say, the week that we were supposed to be voting. And I want to speak a little bit about what changed my mind. So one of the no speakers earlier had mentioned about, consensus in the scientific community that GE products are not dangerous. They do not pose health risks. I would agree with that. And that was one of the reasons why I was on the fence up until the very last minute. I would just say to that, well, yes, there's consensus in the scientific community that the first and maybe even second generation of GE products do not pose a health risk. However, this is an evolving science. The term genetically engineered food is an umbrella term. It will continue evolving as all science does and should. And so the labeling, really, we're not saying it's a warning label. We're not saying whether GE products are good or bad. We're simply labeling them so that we can track, and 10, 20 years from now, if an issue does come up, we'll know why. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Schauble, and I was a committee member. And I'd like to just echo a lot of the other comments that were made by the fellow committee members, but I also would like to acknowledge that I think I probably was the committee member that was the most opposed to GMO labeling when we started the process. And I see my chair kind of over there acknowledging that a bit. And you know, I was torn throughout the entire process, and there's just a couple of points, and I agree with a lot of what has been said before me that I want to mention, but it's true that in terms of the longitudinal health impacts and the science around this, for those GMO foods from the 90s, and even up from 2000 to today, there's no study that shows detrimental health effects, but these are first-generation GMO products. And as technology becomes increasingly integrated into our food production and food supply chains, I'm not saying that it necessarily means that these food products could be unhealthy, but consumers have a right to have the same information that the seed producers, the food producers, and the food processors have so that they can make informed decisions and vote with their dollar. So, thank you.
Thank you all. The debate is finished, and we will now vote on the motion to adopt the report on Measure 92, which recommends a yes vote on Measure 92. If you vote today, please indicate your vote on your ballot at this time. Does anyone know what happens if you turn in your ballot today? You will not receive an email. Okay. Thank you to Alana and the committee for their hard work.